Okay, so we did do an interview before. Went great.
Good.
And I don't know, and that was a math class as well, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, for something like that, I mean, I'm going to ask you the same questions. And feel free if you want to just kind of go off on other topics or things like that.
Okay.
It's because we kind of captured last time after watching the interview, I felt like it was pretty good.
Okay, cool.
So, I mean, you can kind of cover things differently if you want, or pass
Okay.
over things.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Really, I don't want to give you too much direction because, like I said last time, it was perfect. And yeah,
You want me to introduce myself again?
absolutely. Please.
Hi, I am Sue Gonyou. I teach sixth grade math to gifted and talented students at Mendive Middle School.
Excellent. All right. So we want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit and year. So how does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before this lesson and what will come after it?
We are at the initial stages of algebraic thinking, and our first lesson had the students have some kind of fun with finding solutions, and we used different shapes and that sort of thing. I wanted to get to the meat of algebra, and that is creating expressions so that we can utilize and apply algebra in real-world context. So we began that journey today. Most of the expressions that they created were fairly simplistic, although I was amazed by some of the occasional struggles, but fairly straightforward equations. There's a homework activity that I would like to do in a similar format with the class because it gets them out of coefficient letter equals answer and into a different kind of format, which will really stretch their brains. And so I want to come back to this and lead on to that. Once we get to that point, then doing some of the logistics of solving problems, simplifying expressions and so forth, we can do, but they've understood the concept of where we're going, the big picture of algebra, before we kind of tweak some of the nuts and bolts that they need more work on.
Excellent. So talk about the standards or cluster targeted in this lesson. And what did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard or cluster?
The standard basically was develop expressions from real world problems. So I just made sure that they were relevant problems. This is actually an NCTM lesson called Building Bridges. And one of the beautiful things about NCTM is they find the problems for you. They help you with some questioning strategies. And so I utilized their materials and their direction to formulate this lesson. But my intent was to do that 100% and to do that portion of it in multiple approaches.
All right. And which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplified, and how did you plan for this?
I feel if we don't start with the full intent of the Common Core standard, then our lesson is a waste of our time. And any of us who have taught more than a couple of years have plenty of strategies. So the core action 1, which really is the total intent of the standards, was my focus. However, in mathematics, obviously we want to reflect mathematical practices also. And I think my strategies as a mathematics teacher are the mathematical practices. So I think starting with the standard itself and making sure it is rigorous and giving them an open door to go farther is where we want to head.
All right. Moving on to the second section here. We are interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into your lesson. So discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
I have taught algebra for many years in a variety of contexts. I've worked with older students teaching algebra. When we went to developing expressions, almost always, I did a problem and showed them the expression. I think that's the biggest shift. It's discovery. The kids determine what it looks like. And if you notice from the lesson, they developed it in certainly different ways than I thought. And I think that gives them more ownership, like anything they create, but also greater understanding if it's an equation that has meaning or an expression that has meaning for them. I think that is key with this.
All right. And so how did you differentiate in this lesson? Did all students have opportunities to work on grade level content? If all students did not have this opportunity, please explain why.
I rotate between my groups. I have one group that struggles in pacing and also concepts. And if you watched me wander, or if you saw all of that, I visited that group and spent more time there more often. My other groups tend to operate a little more independently, seem to gather the instructional concept, and can be more independent in execution. So it allows me to scaffold for that group especially. They're all good math students, but they're all a little tentative. So I can get over there and solicit the first couple comments, ratify that, and then they can move on and be independent. So I think that's wonderful. I also have students who work at a much quicker pace, and they can move forward with other activities or to the next problem to begin to take a look at that and do some of the pre-review of that before we move on.
And which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson?
With Core Action 3, I hope it's obvious that we have a culture that has developed this kind of learning. I have told them, and often with the Mendai Bucks, I reward them. Sometimes it's not right answers. You may have noticed that one of the students brought up 1/6. That student was unable to tie it into an expression, but I loved the inclusion of the fractions, and I went back and ratified that and encouraged other students to take his kernel of a good idea and put it into an expression. So I like that culture of thinkers, and I really reward in many ways the thinking, whether it's completely right or not. As they are delving into it, I ratify that. And then I think perseverance. That's another thing with rotating. Oh, you're off to a good start. Now let's move that to the next step. Cool, you are almost there. Do you realize that? Sometimes the students need support to persevere, and that's also part of my job.
All right. Would you like to comment on any submitted student work?
I think, as always, one of the difficulties with an activity like this, they'll do the number work, they don't want to do the word work. And so one of the things that, since the lesson didn't get totally complete during, most of it did, we'll come back and reflect again though. I want to see what they wrote, what their strategy, what they learned, putting that into words. And that is very tough. Metacognition is something we as adults don't do well, is reflecting on our thinking. So teaching students to begin to look back and say, I struggled with this, I understand this, I have no clue on this, are things that I think are very important that some of the students will need to come back and be more reflective in their note takers.
All right. And last section here. Great instructors are continuously learning. We want to understand what you celebrated in this lesson and what you would improve upon. So reflecting on this lesson, what worked particularly well and what might you do differently?
Okay. Like I said, I was thrilled with the different approaches they had to expressions. I thought they were much more innovative than I thought. I really felt that the pace of it still was a little bit slow for my accelerated students. And again, I work with very bright students, but I had several who had processed through a step and were waiting to move forward. So I think one of the things I could do, as I indicated earlier, I have a group that processes very slowly. But then I might have a group that is my speed demons who I put more independently and that they need to listen when we discuss, but they can move forward on their own to the next problem. That doesn't mean they'll get it right, but it kind of satisfies their need to move on and get done. And I might even look at scaffolding a couple of extra problems that are part of their note taker. The students don't know when everybody puts in a note taker that maybe some of the note takers are different, which is also something you can do as a teacher. If you have a group that needs a simpler approach, especially when they're working more independent, you can create a couple note takers. You don't make one pink and one yellow, they're all yellow, but you know who got one set and who got the other. And I think that's a wonderful way to differentiate, that they're both experiencing the same thing, but that there's that differentiation on difficulty for those students who need more scaffolding or need more acceleration on the concept.
Excellent. And the last question, were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors or reactions?
I think I was pleased with the fact that the students seemed a little more relaxed this time and a little more responsive. Once again, I had not anticipated that working through this lesson would take the entire class period, and it did. And it just underscores the fact that Common Core just takes time to develop, and you can't rush that. If you're going to get those good, rich conversations, you've got to allow the kids to respond and multiple students to respond. You can't just say, okay, those two, good, we're moving on. You have to allow, because often I found even more insightful comments came after the first 2, 3, or 4 comments. So I think for me, it's just remembering to be patient and allow it. And I had no trouble, and the kids were ecstatic when I said, we won't do the homework at this time. They went, yes, because we're really not ready for it. We got through the lesson, but the homework requires a little stage setting, and we didn't have time for the stage setting, which was okay. They got the lesson done and came in with what I felt were very good insights.
All right. Well, that's it.
Okay.
Great job.
Thank you.
That was good.